by improvised explosive devices, the #1 killer in Afghanistan. Even as President Obama weighs the best way ahead in Afghanistan, Secretary Gates is working to ensure that this department continues to do everything possible to provide our men and women in uniform with the very best protection and capabilities to defeat the growing IED threat. To name a few, additional intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance capabilities, including the most advanced drones and new platforms such as the MC-12, are either in theater or on their way. Last month, as you know, Secretary Gates ordered nearly 3,000 enablers, including additional route clearance and explosive ordnance disposal teams, into Afghanistan. And MRAPs, designed specifically for Afghanistan's rugged terrain, the MATVs, are being delivered by air as fast as we can get them off the factory floor, with hundreds due to be fielded to our warfighters by year's end. Even with all these additional counter-IED resources, there will no doubt be many difficult and dangerous days ahead for our forces, and frankly, for the journalists who cover them as well. On that note, I would ask that you and your news organizations continue to be vigilant about making sure you do not identify units and individuals that have been involved in attacks or crashes before next of kin has been notified. Every news account of such an incident obviously adds tremendous stress to families already going through extremely tough times. So it is all of our duty to take precautions to avoid unnecessarily burdening our military families, while at the same time, of course, making sure we do all we can to keep the American people informed of developments in Afghanistan in a timely fashion. By and large, I must say you all have done a tremendous job in this regard, and for that we are very appreciative, so keep up the good work. With that, I'll take your questions. Ann. Laura, sorry, thank you.
Just to follow up on that quickly, I have another question, but are you referring to a specific incident in which a casualty was identified before next of kin?
I am referring, obviously we've had a number of incidents this week, and I think if you were to talk to my colleagues downrange, they believe that while many outlets acted very responsibly on this count, there were a few that may have jumped the gun in terms of specifically the Stryker brigades, the attack on the Stryker units.
Okay. My other question was, there was a report out of Germany today that a German general said that the strike in September on the tanker, the airstrike in September, was appropriate, even though it resulted in civilian casualties. Can you confirm the results of that investigation, or otherwise give us a status update on it?
As far as I know, we are still in the midst of, let me just check here, I know we were doing our own.
He said that was the investigation.
It was the what investigation?
He said that was the result of the NATO investigation.
My notes here reflect that the investigation is almost complete. But when it is complete, it'll be forwarded through NATO and the German government, and they will ultimately have to make determinations about what, if any, action they want to take with regarding their forces. As far as I know, Laura, our investigation is not yet complete, so I wouldn't be in a position to speak to whatever the German general is saying about the state of the investigation. Yeah, Jeff.
There are about 25 route clearance teams in Afghanistan. That compares with 84 in Iraq at the height of the surge. Are there plans afoot to beef up that number of route clearance teams to about what it was in Iraq?
Well, there's many components to that question. I don't know, frankly, and if I did, I shouldn't speak to it, what General McChrystal is calling for specifically in terms of additional route clearance capabilities in his recommendation for additional forces. And whether or not, if it ultimately is approved, that it would bring the levels there anywhere commensurate to what they were in Iraq. As bad as things are in Afghanistan right now with regards to the IED threat, they still pale in comparison to the losses we were suffering at the worst of our days in Iraq. And that is, I think we had 56 U.S. personnel killed in Afghanistan this month. I think you'll recall in the worst of it in Iraq, I think there were a few months where we lost 130 plus U.S. forces. So I think some perspective is needed. That said, it is a very real concern, and as evidenced by the fact that the Secretary has tried even while this discussion is going on at the White House to figure out what we can do to provide immediate help to our forces, and thus last month he approved the deployment orders for roughly 3,000 additional counter-IED enablers, including route clearance and explosive ordnance disposal teams.
Follow-up, did you say hundreds of MATVs will be fielded by year's end? If so, can you give a more precise
Well,
estimate?
I'll have to look up what our chart's goals are in terms of production and fielding, but that is the hope. Obviously, this all ramps up, but you and I can follow up afterwards if you like. But I think while it starts off slowly, it picks up steam very quickly, and so the hope is that we can get significant numbers of MATVs into theater by year's end. And a footnote to that, for those of you who have not had an opportunity to see these vehicles yet, there's going to be a static display here. I think it's static, right? Static display here on Monday from 10 to 2 between quarters 2 and 3 by the south parking lot. So this is open to the media and the public, and Undersecretary Carter and Brigadier General Mike Brogan will be there about midday to offer some perspective on these new vehicles. Just for those who are interested, this is a test vehicle that's been brought down temporarily from Aberdeen to quickly show you all its capabilities. Okay? Yeah, Justin.
The 2010 Defense Authorization Bill includes SERP funds that will be used, as Senator Levin puts it, to peel back the layers of the Taliban in Afghanistan. Can you explain how that how those funds will be used?
Well, I mean, ultimately, it's a determination of the Afghan government to determine if they want to pursue a reconciliation and a reintegration program. But due to the National Defense Authorization Act, we now have the authorities to support that effort with CERT money if that's something the Afghans want to roll out on. So we've now had the latitude, the authority to provide SERP in much the same way we did in Iraq. So that flexibility now exists if that's something the government of Afghanistan wishes to pursue on any large-scale level.
So as you understand, they may be asking certain lower-level Taliban to switch sides, essentially, and provide security? Would provide security?
I think that's a question that's best directed to the government of Afghanistan as to what they want to pursue and how they want to pursue it. We, though, in the authorization process, like to anticipate potential needs and to make sure we have the authorities required to be of assistance, and that's all that's taking place here. We now, thanks to the work of the Congress, have the latitude to support Afghanistan's reconciliation efforts with CERP funds if that's something they pursue.
Okay, and on one separate topic, can you explain why the decision was made not to scramble those jets last week when contact was lost with Northwest Flight 188 for 40 minutes?
I can't. I honestly, it's not even a subject I've done much thinking about. I think you want to talk to NORAD, they can probably help you out.
Well, we're talking about a plane that was lost in the air essentially for 40 minutes. What kind of, those could have serious terrorist implications.
It's a great question for the command that's responsible for such things, and I'd urge you to direct it to them. If you can't get a satisfactory answer, by all means come back to me and I'll dig into it myself. NORAD won't give you an answer? All right, well, you're welcome to work with me and I'll try to get you one. How about that? Okay? Barbara, is that a question that you all are having a tough time getting an answer to? No one has raised this with me. I have an email account and usually you ping me on all sorts of things, but I haven't heard any complaints about the inability to get an answer on this question. But let's look into it. Okay? Barbara.
Rahm Emanuel said a few days ago that, quoting him, the president is, regarding Afghanistan, the president is asking the questions that have never been asked on the civilian side, the political side, the military side, and the strategic side. On the military side, the questions that have never been asked certainly would have been the responsibility of Secretary Gates since he's been here for many years now. So why did the Secretary not ask the questions that Rahm Emanuel is referring to, or is Mr. Emanuel incorrect?
Well, what I would urge you to do, Barbara, is probably to get probably get the most up-to-date information from the White House on this matter. I think you're referring to Mr. Emanuel's appearance on the Sunday shows nearly 10 days ago. And I think since then the White House has addressed this issue and sort of clarified what Mr. Emanuel was speaking of. And I don't think it was the questions, it was more the answers that were not satisfactory. But I don't have anything to add to the current state of their statements on this issue.
Let me ask you this in a different way then. The Secretary has been here for many years now.
Almost 3. December 18th will be 3.
It is on his watch that the security situation as identified by himself, Admiral Mullen, and General McChrystal has deteriorated. So what responsibility as the Secretary of Defense does Mr. Gates have for the deteriorating situation? As we go through this assessment, what is the assessment about how it got so bad and why no one dealt with it?
Okay. A couple things you're asking there. As for the assessment, and I'm going to be very careful about how far I go down this road, but the assessment is a forward-looking enterprise. It is not about looking back and trying to assign blame for where things went wrong. It is about how we chart the best course going forward. So I don't think the assessment deals with the matter that you're raising with me now. As for the degree of responsibility that Secretary Gates feels for Afghanistan, historically and in its current state, he's spoken to these issues before. Historically, and you can go to his testimony before Congress over the past year, where he very candidly said that he feels a certain degree of responsibility for the fact that we miscalculated after the collapse of after the Soviets withdrew from Afghanistan and turned our back on the Afghans and the Pakistani government, for that matter. And that was a mistake. So he has been very candid about sort of his historical responsibility here. As for how things have transpired over the past 3 years, it is not a secret to anyone here that the focus and the priority of this department and this government was on Iraq when Secretary Gates took office. In fact, he was hired specifically to right the ship, so to speak, with regards to Iraq, to fix the problem that Iraq had devolved to. That's what his focus was. That was the direction given to him by the President, by the Commander-in-Chief, and that's where he directed his time, energy, and the department's resources. At a certain point, because of the incredible turnaround that we've all witnessed in Iraq, it became possible to begin to accept greater risk there, i.e., using fewer forces to ensure the gains we got there would hold. And so at that delicate tipping point, we began to adjust the balance between those two theaters, or the imbalance, as some would suggest, and started to flow additional resources into Afghanistan. And I would note that even going into office, although his priority was on Iraq and his orders were to fix Iraq, obviously we were fighting another war at the same time, and he took steps along the way to ensure that that one was at least better resourced, extending a brigade very early on, adding a brigade very early on, and all over the course of his tenure in this job, our footprint has probably tripled in Afghanistan. I would venture to say that, I'd have to go back and look at it, but we probably had 20-odd thousand troops in Afghanistan when Secretary Gates took over, and we're now at 68,000 troops. So although the priority was clearly on Iraq, it's hard to say Afghanistan was neglected, but it clearly was not the priority that Iraq was, and that at a certain point he made, along with the Commander-in-Chief, a judgment about flowing additional forces into Afghanistan at a greater rate, and now we're at a point where we have the ability to do so even more if that is the direction the President sets forth. Okay? Yeah, Tony.
Can I ask you about another assessment that's forward-looking? This is on the Pentagon's largest weapons program, the Joint Strike Fighter. I understand that this joint estimating team assessment that reviewed last year's numbers has been circulated to senior level officials, including the Secretary and Ashton Carter. And it basically comes to the conclusion that it came last year, that this program, if all went poorly with it,